Your body is 99.9999% empty space. Right now, as you're reading this, you think you're solid, substantial, made of real matter. But you're not. You are almost entirely nothing, a collection of subatomic particles separated by vast distances, held together by invisible forces, creating the illusion of solidity where none exists. If you could shrink down small enough to see atoms as they really are, you would discover that what you call your body is mostly void, empty space, nothingness. The particles that make up your atoms are so small compared to the space between them that calling you solid is like calling the solar system solid because it contains a few planets. You are not made of matter in any meaningful sense. You are made of mostly nothing, arranged in patterns that trick your senses into experiencing solidity, weight, and substance. You are a walking, breathing, thinking void that has somehow convinced itself it's real. This isn't metaphor or philosophy. This is what physics reveals when you actually look at the structure of matter. And when you see what atoms really are, it becomes clear that everything you think you know about the physical world, including your own body, is fundamentally wrong. Let me show you just how empty you really are, and why this should completely shatter your understanding of what it means to exist as a physical being in a physical universe. Start with something everyone thinks they understand: atoms. You learned in school that atoms are the building blocks of matter. Protons and neutrons in the nucleus, electrons orbiting around them, like a tiny solar system. Simple enough. But here's what they didn't tell you about the scale. If you took a hydrogen atom and scaled up the nucleus to the size of a marble, the electron would be orbiting about half a mile away. Everything between the nucleus and the electron, empty space, absolutely nothing. But even that comparison understates how empty atoms really are. A marble half a mile away still sounds like there's substantial stuff scattered around. The reality is far more dramatic. If you scaled an atom up to the size of a football stadium, the nucleus would be smaller than a marble sitting at the center of the field. The electrons would be tiny specks way up in the stands. Everything else, 99.999% of the atom, would be completely empty. Now here's the part that should break your brain. You are made of trillions upon trillions of these atoms. Every single one of them is essentially empty space. String them together, and you don't get solidity. You get a vast network of nothingness held together by forces you can't see, can't feel, and can barely comprehend. The chair you're sitting on, mostly empty space. The floor beneath your feet, mostly empty space. The air you're breathing, mostly empty space. Your own body, mostly empty space. Everything you think of as the solid, substantial physical world is actually a nearly complete void populated by an incredibly sparse collection of subatomic particles. But it gets stranger, because even those particles, the protons, neutrons, and electrons that seem to be the actual stuff of matter, aren't really solid objects either. Take an electron. You probably picture it as a tiny ball of charge orbiting the nucleus. But electrons aren't balls. They're not objects in any conventional sense. An electron is better described as a probability cloud, a region of space where the electron might be found if you tried to measure it. But before you measure it, the electron doesn't have a definite position. It exists as a spread-out wave of possibilities. Even more bizarre, electrons don't orbit the nucleus like planets orbit the sun. They exist in quantum states called orbitals, three-dimensional probability distributions that describe where the electron is likely to be found. These orbitals have strange shapes, some spherical, some dumbbell shaped, some even more complex. But none of them correspond to a little ball following a predictable path. So the electrons that you think are the solid parts of atoms aren't solid and don't have definite positions. They're smeared out quantum possibilities that somehow give rise to the illusion of discrete particles when you interact with them. What about the nucleus? Surely protons and neutrons are solid, substantial things. Wrong again. Protons and neutrons are made of quarks. And quarks are held together by the strong nuclear force carried by particles called gluons. But here's the really weird part. Most of the mass of a proton doesn't come from the quarks themselves. It comes from the energy of the force field that binds the quarks together. In other words, most of the mass of the particles that make up the solid parts of atoms isn't matter at all. It's energy, frozen energy, locked up in force fields that exist in the tiny spaces between quarks. When you get down to the fundamental level, the distinction between matter and energy disappears entirely. What you call matter is just energy arranged in particular patterns. So let's take inventory of what you're actually made of. Mostly empty space populated by probability clouds of electrons that don't have definite positions. Surrounding nuclei made of particles whose mass comes primarily from energy fields between quarks. At no point in this description do we encounter anything that deserves to be called solid matter. But here's where it gets truly mind-bending. If atoms are mostly empty space and you are made of atoms, why don't you just fall apart? Why don't your atoms pass right through each other? Why does matter seem solid when it's actually mostly void? The answer is electromagnetic force. The electrons in your atoms repel the electrons in other atoms. When you touch something, when you feel the solidity of matter, what you're actually feeling is electromagnetic repulsion. The atoms in your hand never actually touch the atoms in the object you're holding. They get close, their electron clouds start to overlap, electromagnetic forces kick in, and the atoms push away from each other. The sensation of solidity is actually the sensation of electromagnetic fields pushing against each other across empty space. You have never touched anything in your entire life. Every sensation of contact, pressure, resistance, and texture is actually you feeling electromagnetic forces acting at a distance between atoms that are mostly empty space. This is why matter seems solid despite being mostly void. It's not that the empty space gets filled in somehow. It's that the forces acting between the sparse particles are so strong that they create the illusion of continuous solid substance. You experience solidity not because matter is solid, but because electromagnetic forces are incredibly powerful. But even this explanation misses the deeper strangeness. Because when you really understand what's happening at the quantum level, the entire notion of particles existing in space starts to break down. In quantum field theory, our best current description of fundamental reality, particles aren't really particles at all. They're excitations in quantum fields that permeate all of space. An electron isn't a little ball of charge, it's a particular pattern of excitation in the electron field. A photon isn't a particle of light, it's an excitation in the electromagnetic field. From this perspective, what you call your body isn't made of particles separated by empty space. It's made of patterns of field excitation in an underlying quantum foam that fills all of space. The emptiness between particles isn't really empty, it's filled with quantum fields fluctuating at their minimum energy levels. But these fields aren't stuff in any conventional sense either. They're mathematical entities, abstract patterns of information that somehow give rise to the appearance of matter when they interact in complex ways. At the deepest level we can currently probe, reality seems to be made of mathematics rather than substance. So what are you, really? You are not a collection of solid particles. You are not even a collection of particles separated by empty space. You are a pattern of information, a complex arrangement of quantum field excitations that creates the illusion of being a substantial, continuous, solid body. This pattern of information that you call yourself is constantly changing. The atoms in your body are being replaced all the time. Every few years, essentially every atom that makes up your body has been exchanged with the environment. The matter that composes you today is completely different from the matter that composed you 7 years ago. But more fundamentally, even the particles that make up those atoms are constantly being exchanged. In quantum field theory, identical particles are truly indistinguishable. The electron in your brain right now might have been in a star 1 billion years ago, then in a rock, then in a plant, then in the animal you ate for lunch. There's no meaningful sense in which it's your electron. What persists is not the matter but the pattern, the information structure that organizes field excitations into the complex arrangements that give rise to your experience of being a physical body. But even this pattern is constantly shifting, constantly being renewed, constantly reconstructing itself from a flux of quantum field interactions. You are not a thing, you are a process, a dynamic pattern of information flow that maintains its organization while the substrate constantly changes. Like a whirlpool in a stream, the water molecules are always different, but the pattern persists, except that in your case, even the water is mostly empty space, and the molecules are probability clouds of field excitations. This raises a profound question. If you're mostly empty space, if your atoms are mostly void, if even your particles are just patterns of information in quantum fields, then what exactly is having the experience of feeling solid and substantial? The answer seems to be that consciousness itself might be a pattern of information, not located in any particular place, not made of any particular substance, but emerging from the complex interactions of quantum field excitations organized in specific ways. You don't have a brain that generates consciousness. You are consciousness arising from a particular pattern of information flow in mostly empty space. But here's the deepest mystery. If you are mostly nothing, if your atoms are mostly void, if your particles are just information patterns in quantum fields, then how is it possible for nothing to be aware of itself? How does emptiness become conscious? How do patterns of field excitation in mostly empty space give rise to the subjective experience of being something? This is the hard problem of consciousness taken to its logical extreme. It's not just that we don't know how brain matter gives rise to subjective experience. It's that when you look closely enough, there is no brain matter. There are only patterns of information in mostly empty space, somehow giving rise to the experience of being a conscious entity that feels solid and real. You are mostly nothing, becoming aware of mostly nothing through processes we don't understand at all. The emptiness that makes up your atoms is somehow experiencing the emptiness that makes up the world around you, and creating the vivid illusion that both you and the world are solid, substantial, and real. But perhaps the illusion is more interesting than the reality. Perhaps the fact that mostly nothing can organize itself into patterns complex enough to experience being something is the most remarkable thing in the universe. Perhaps consciousness isn't despite the emptiness, but because of it. Maybe the vast empty spaces in your atoms are not a sign that you're not really there, but the very thing that makes it possible for you to be there at all. Maybe consciousness requires emptiness, space for information patterns to form and evolve and interact in ways that give rise to subjective experience. From this perspective, the fact that you're mostly empty space isn't a problem to be solved or a reality to be accepted. It's the fundamental precondition for awareness itself. The void doesn't diminish you, it makes you possible. And when you realize this, when you truly understand that you are mostly nothing arranged in patterns that experience being something, it might change how you relate to your own existence. You are not a solid object moving through empty space. You are empty space that has organized itself into the experience of being a solid object. You are the universe's way of looking at itself through mostly empty eyes, thinking about itself with a mostly empty brain, feeling itself with mostly empty hands. The nothingness that you are made of is the same nothingness that fills the cosmos. There is no fundamental separation between you and the space around you. You are all part of the same quantum field, all part of the same underlying emptiness that somehow gives rise to the experience of something. Your body is 99.9999% empty space. But that empty space is not empty of possibility. It's not empty of pattern. It's not empty of information. And somehow, mysteriously, beautifully, inexplicably, it's not empty of consciousness. You are mostly nothing. But nothing has never been more alive. But let's push this revelation deeper, understanding that your mostly empty space is just the beginning. Consider what happens when you try to measure particles that make up your body. Quantum mechanics reveals something that should shatter your understanding. You cannot simultaneously know both exact position and exact momentum of any particle. This isn't because instruments aren't good enough. Particles don't have exact positions and momenta to be measured. This is Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. The particles that make up your atoms don't exist in definite states. They exist in superposition, literally being in multiple states simultaneously until something forces them to choose. That electron in your brain, it's not at any specific location. It's in superposition of being in many different locations simultaneously. Only when something interacts with it does it collapse into having definite position. Some interpretations suggest conscious observation is required to collapse superposition states. This raises a terrifying possibility. Maybe particles that make up your body only have definite properties when you're conscious of your body. When you're not paying attention to your hand, maybe atoms exist in superposition neither here nor there. Maybe your body only becomes real when consciousness focuses on it and forces quantum states to collapse. You are not just mostly empty space, you're also mostly indefinite, existing in quantum limbo until consciousness makes you real. You are probability waves that crystallize into particle-like behavior only when observed. But quantum field theory reveals that empty space isn't empty. The vacuum seethes with activity, virtual particles constantly popping into existence and annihilating, quantum fields fluctuating, space-time vibrating with zero-point energy. The emptiness between your atoms is filled with quantum foam, turbulent sea of virtual activity. You are not mostly empty space as nothingness, you are mostly quantum foam. The boundary between real particles and virtual particles isn't clear. The electron in your atom constantly exchanges virtual photons with other particles. These virtual photons carry energy and affect matter behavior even though they're not real conventionally. So even the tiny fraction that seems made of actual particles constantly interacts with virtual particles existing fleetingly in quantum foam. The line between real and virtual matter and void, something and nothing, becomes completely blurred. You are probability waves embedded in quantum foam, constantly exchanging virtual particles with vacuum existing in superposition until observed. String theory proposes fundamental constituents aren't particles but vibrating strings in 11 dimensions. What you call an electron is actually a string vibrating in particular pattern. If string theory is correct, you are made of music vibration patterns in higher dimensional space that project into three-dimensional world. Your body is literally cosmic music, harmonies vibrating in dimensions you can't perceive. Some physicists propose reality is fundamentally information. You are not vibrating strings, you are information processing, computation being performed by the universe. The particles are actually information bits. Forces are information transfer processes. Your entire body is a biological computer running the program that creates your experience of being physical. If reality is computational, asking what you're made of becomes meaningless. You're not made of anything. You are something the universe is calculating. You are not conscious being inhabiting mostly empty body. You are conscious experience of the universe computing information processing pattern in mostly empty space. Final twist. If you are mostly empty space filled with quantum foam computing information patterns, then where exactly are you? Nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. Your consciousness isn't localized to your brain, because your brain is mostly empty space filled with quantum computations extending throughout universe. You experience yourself as localized to your body, but this might be illusion. The real you might be spread throughout entire universe, with concentrations in mostly empty space you call your body. You are not in the universe. You are the universe becoming aware of itself through information processing patterns in mostly empty space. You are mostly nothing. But that nothing is the most something thing there is, the creative void from which all existence emerges.